It wasn't a very edifying display this afternoon, was it, that committee meeting?
No, it wasn't, but I don't think it was Boris's fault. I think it was the committee's fault. I've served on select committees, and I have to say this one was very, very bizarre indeed. There was a lot of repetitive questioning, not necessarily because they wanted to get answers and were not getting them. It was because they simply weren't listening to the answers or weren't concentrating. I think there were a couple of outstandingly good questioners. I think both might be lawyers, Andy Carter and...
I saw that.
Yeah. And, I've forgotten his name, the chap with the Scottish accent. He's a colleague of mine who'll never forgive me. An Italian name. It's just gone out of my head. It's
That's
terrible.
Right. You'll be forgiven. Yeah, no, look, I mean, but here's the point.
Alberto Costa came to me.
Here's the point, Michael Fabricant. This is the man in charge of setting the most draconian set of rules we've ever lived by in this country. And we all damn well knew we weren't supposed to leave our house for more than an hour a day. We weren't supposed to go and visit sick and dying relatives. We weren't supposed to socialise at that moment at all, not even have a friend round in the garden. I mean, a lot of us did, but we weren't supposed to do any of these things. And here's the bloke in charge of setting the rules, claiming he didn't quite know what they were, so he had to take guidance. And then today we found, I think for the first time, that the guidance was not coming from civil servants, was not coming from senior figures, but young press officers like Jack Doyle. It's not very believable, is it?
Well, it did come from others as well, and he did make that clear. But you're right, he was hoisted by his own petard. I mean, he did not want any rules. In Sweden, they gave guidance, like, try not to meet people, try to keep distance, but we'll leave it to your good judgment. And you know what? Although their death rate was slightly higher than that of the UK, it wasn't that bad. And we, by the way, didn't do badly. We actually did better than Germany.
The long-term damage to health statistics, mental health statistics, the economy...
Well, we don't know.
I think Sweden and Florida look better than us. But here's the point. We didn't do a Sweden. And even if Johnson's instincts were to do a Sweden, which they may well have been, and if you believe his articles in the Telegraph over the years, that we've always thought there was...
But he was advised otherwise, and this is the point.
But Michael,
Nigel, Prime Ministers have to take advice, and he took advice from the scientists, and you and I can probably agree that it was the wrong advice. And similarly, he was given advice that in a business... you imagine GBNews if we were now in the dreadful COVID pandemic. You and I would be meeting in small rooms, and the idea is that you are in a bubble. So there were...
no, I fully understand that.
There were guidance, so he genuinely thought he was obeying the rules.
I don't think we'd have been sitting out in the garden, about 40 of us, drinking glasses of wine at what was clearly a social event.
But the garden, I might add, was probably the safest place to be because it was well ventilated, and the photographs I've seen are only 2 or 3 of them together, and people scattered.
They were social events, they weren't work events. It's as plain as the nose on your face.
Well, he was saying this was an event where they'd had previously a meeting indoors and afterwards went outdoors.
Well,
I know we can go over and over about this, but I genuinely believe that he thought he was operating within the rules because the rules were clear. And as a colleague of yours and mine, and, whom I have huge respect for, Tom Harwood said, people are conflating the anger because of what happened during COVID and the fact they couldn't see their parents. And you mentioned, people not being able to go to funerals. He couldn't go to his mother's funeral either. So he, too, suffered all that.
Do you think overall he's a truthful man?
He writes very good fiction, but I think overall, yes, I think where it counts, he's truthful.
If you're his strongest defender...
Well, you're the ones who said, look, he's a very good writer. But hey, where it counts, I do not think he misled Parliament because I think he genuinely believed he was operating within those complex rules.
He did mislead Parliament. He's admitted that he misled Parliament on the basis of the information that he was given, and that's a slightly different thing.
Well, he said on the basis that he'd had the fixed penalty notice, and my actual view is that the biggest mistake Boris made was actually accepting a fixed penalty notice, like someone who's caught for speeding, and then not challenging it in the courts because he didn't want it
Right.
to. And I think if he had challenged it in the courts, because after all, Starmer was in a tiny room socialising. They didn't issue a fixed penalty notice there. So it's quite...
No, that's a fair point. No, I get that. Final thought, will he survive all of this?
I think it all depends on what the committee does. Now, if they, as you know, the rules are that if they were to give him more than 10 days, it could trigger, and it would trigger actually in practice, a by-election. And I'm pretty sure that would be difficult at a place
Because
like
the
Uxbridge.
Commons would support it.
I don't know that they would, but they probably would because of precedent. It would be a free vote. But you know what? I don't think it's necessarily going to be that. When I look at other people who've done far more serious things, actually, they got far less than...
I think he'll survive too. Michael Fabricant, thank you very much indeed.